Good morning and welcome to the event bestie. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have this conversation because there's been a couple of viral conversations on the internet and I wanted a professional photographer's opinion. So I bring you the professional photographer, Samantha Clarke. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Very excited about this. Okay, so before we get started, who are you and how did you get here? AKA, what's your bio?
Well, I am an international photographer. I started about 15 years ago, and I started as a portrait photographer and a wedding photographer, and I still specialized in those areas to this day. I am I would say, interestingly, I started out sort of doing it part-time, which I think a lot of people do.
Mhm.
And then I eventually decided I needed to go full-time as a photographer because the opportunities were just too good to turn down. In my past life, I was a lawyer. So I practiced law, I did all the things, and I actually did love the job as a lawyer. However, I wasn't able to do all the fun traveling and all the cool opportunities that were coming up. So I decided that I would just take the leap into photography and see how it goes and just keep my license as a lawyer active just in case I wanted to return, but
Smart.
I didn't have to return, and I am so grateful for the opportunity. I'm also at this point offering mentoring and coaching to other photographers who not necessarily want to go full time, but just want to be more professional and run their creative hustle as a business and not just as, a side hustle or like a thing to do on the weekend. So I also do that. And I am a mom of two and a wife and all the things. So yeah,
Awesome.
that's me in a nutshell.
The law to photography pipeline, so very common.
Well,
Well,
I mean, it's interesting. There's actually a few very well-known photographers who are also previous lawyers. So I've connected with them and we've had our little, like, thank God we got out type of conversations. But
that's funny. So the pipeline is
yeah,
actually more relevant than I actually am joking about. That's
I
really
think
amusing.
so. It's interesting. It's like something that people do, like, even if it's not law, but like corporate backgrounds
Mhm.
have entered into photography or some type of creative job. So it is pretty interesting that it's more common than you think.
Why do you think that is? Like, is it because like you're so structured and put in a box in your corporate life and you just want an escape and then it allows you to escape through the lens of creativity?
Yeah, I do think so. I also think that if you come from I would maybe not corporate, but if you come from some type of business profit driven sector, you actually are able to thrive creatively because you have a mindset for business. So it's not just the creative side, which a lot of artists are so gifted, but they don't have the mindset of how to run a business. So they may be really good in, their craft, but ultimately we are trying to be profitable. We're trying to run a business that can pay the bills. So a lot of the people who come from these professions, they have a different type of training that allows them to be more savvy as a creative,
Mm.
and it helps with their success, I think.
That's so interesting. I've said the same thing about me when I launched my event planning business back in 2016. I was like, I'm an excellent event planner. I don't know the first thing about business. And I didn't have a business background. I went from being an employee to being an entrepreneur out of nowhere. So I think like that is a really interesting point too, because we think, oh, okay, you have the skill set, the passion, the time to learn and build the skill set, but you do still need the business side. And of course, the law background means that your contracts are always great and your waivers are always on point
Yeah.
from a photographer standpoint. So I
Right.
think that that is the best of both worlds. And yes, not everyone is going to have that, but you need to have both set of skills. You can't just be a really good photographer. You have to be a good photographer business person to have a good photography business. So that's really, really
Absolutely.
interesting. So what types
Mhm.
of events and such have you done? Do you have any favorites? And you said that it gets you to travel throughout the world now. So yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I really do like weddings. I do think weddings for me, I am into them. I love seeing people at their happiest, most joyous moments. So I will always, be drawn to those types of moments, and they're very challenging as well. Like I come from, I used to, play sports in university. Volleyball. I played volleyball. So I always have been like a competitive type of person in terms of being an athlete. And I think wedding photography is like an Olympic sport, like it could be. I feel like it's so intense at moments. There's a lot of joy, but it's a lot of pressure. There's always time constraints. It's like game day type of thing.
Yeah,
So I
you're not
enjoy
wrong at all.
it's yeah, it's like it's
It's
fun,
a
but it's like
decathlon
you
for
better get
sure.
it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right up until the very last moment. There's no chill. Which, sometimes it's like, oh boy, here we go again. And then some moments I'm like, oh my gosh, like I did that. So I enjoy weddings. I also really like working other types of events. So sometimes I get the chance to do conferences and more like corporate style events, and those are fun too because a lot of times people are in their networking bag, so you get to see people sort of just like interacting and getting to know each other, and those moments are cool as well. And I also kind of enjoy being the type of photographer that captures things in a more documentary style sometimes, where I don't necessarily have to direct all the moments. So that's fun. And then yeah, there's moments of course where I'm like, okay guys, come over here, stand over here, do this, do that. So that's also fun for me to do
Nice.
as well. Yeah,
That's a good wide range of events for sure, with a
absolutely.
focus on photography on weddings, which kudos to you, because I escaped weddings when I launched my own business. It would have been the easy route to go because I had done them and had done them in the past. But ooh, there's just something, there's an extra added level of uh the demand for perfection and you know what you need. And my last episode, I was talking with Lissa from an event DJing standpoint, and so I'm just like this expectations that people have, and I'm like, you can't not feed people because your photographer has been up with you since the crack of dawn and does not sit or eat or would do anything until the last person has left. So tell me a little bit about like what is your typical, I guess, like wedding photography day look like for the people who need to understand how long of a day this is.
Yes. Well, I usually start anywhere from 2 to 3 hours before the ceremony starts. So people usually, like, the guests don't really see the photographers until the ceremony, but we're really working several hours before that. But I usually arrive an hour earlier than my start time. So I do that just because I don't like being late, first of all. And it's important just to like get I don't know, get yourself together and just get organized before you actually pull out the camera.
Mhm.
So I'm usually there. Sometimes it's 11 hours of a day. Sometimes it's closer to 10. But we're usually there in the bridal suite or the groom suite working. with the wedding party to capture them as they get ready for the ceremony. And in a lot of cases, people are doing their photography sometimes before the ceremony because they want to capture the portraits and like all the formal images
Hmm.
beforehand, which is like not traditional at all. A lot of brides are still like, no, I want us to do everything after the ceremony, which is fine. I don't usually pressure people either way, but
Hmm.
I give them the option to do if they want to.
Right.
And yeah, it's really just us capturing moments, anticipating moments, which is really important. And just being ready to, be not just the photographer, but sometimes, like a friend, a friendly, encouraging person that's nearby.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of our role throughout the day from start to finish.
Yeah. And you mentioned, not just being a photographer, but being being a friend, especially since you are capturing such intimate moments, the getting ready, the first time the mom sees the bride or when the father might see the bride, like you're capturing all these hyper emotional moments. So you become part of the
Mm-hmm.
family in that particular case. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
again, because there's such a heightened need for perfection on that day, usually from the bride or sometimes the bride's family or the groom's family, their parents, whoever's paying for it. Um, you know, there is a lot of diffusing of those emotions because you don't want that to come across in the
Mm-hmm.
pictures because they're not going to want that to come across in the pictures for sure. And we'll get
Exactly.
to a particular story that went viral on the internets afterwards.
Yes.
So when it comes to hiring a wedding photographer, an event photographer, what are the questions that clients should be asking?
Mm. I I usually try to give people my style. So I try to explain it in words. You can go on my website. Of course, you can look at the photos and get a sense of, okay, people will try to describe what I do, but I like to put it into words. And I think it's important to ask not only what it's like with you behind the camera, but what your editing style is. And yes, we will talk about this more. Um, but it's all a part of the process. Like a photographer, I would say, is basically like an artist because we're not just capturing a moment, we're also putting our own spin on it by, using different lighting, um, our angles, the way that we capture it, and then the way that we process the photo afterwards. So the editing style as well. So it's like you could have two photographers standing side by side and they're going to capture the same thing slightly differently because of the way we all, operate as creatives. So I do think it's important for people to ask and try to understand more about that person's approach and their purpose behind what they're doing. um, I think it's just, a good way to get a sense of who they are as a creative. So that in itself is really important. And I also think people should be asking about not so much because I think Instagram is kind of deceiving at times because we see beautiful images, but we don't know who the person is. And do you even want to be around this person? Do you like this person? Is this person going to be friendly? Are they going to have their phone out? Are they going to be stopping to eat snacks throughout the day? Like, what type of person are they? So you just want to get to know them and you want to hear from them and get a sense of who they are and just see if it's really a good fit. Because fit is really, I think, important, especially on a wedding day. Maybe not so much for other types of events because they're not
Right.
as long and they're not as emotional, but just getting to know the person is super important as well, just to see if you like them.
That's a
Do
really
you
good
like
point that I
that?
hadn't really thought about because I think that people are
Mhm.
just like, I want the pretty pictures. I like what I
Mhm.
see on Instagram, and they might have a conversation about certain things, but cultural sensitivities, and
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
sure you've done a wide range of different types of weddings.
Mhm.
Not all weddings are, you know, a ceremony and a reception and a party. Like
Mhm.
different cultures, their weddings are 3 days, right? Or
Right.
there's a lot. There might be religious components, or there might be other components that are really key to those cultures, etc. So if you haven't shot one of those before, then you don't know what the moments are, you don't know what's coming, and you don't know what to
Yes,
capture. And so I think it's,
exactly.
you have to do way more research. It's not just like, oh, I checked out their Instagram and it looked good. Even if you were referred to them by someone, like it's still about fit. That person's gonna be hanging out with you for 11 hours.
Yeah,
So like
exactly.
that's a long period of time, and like in your face,
Mhm.
not like this is not a I'm in the background shooting, right? Like they're
Right.
zooming in on your nose holes and your fingertips. So like
Yeah,
you gotta
literally.
you gotta be able to have some sort of rapport and be like, okay, it's um so that's a really, really good point that I hadn't really thought about. I mean, I haven't been in a position of hiring a wedding photographer because I am not married, but I've worked with quite a few in my day. So I really,
Mhm.
you do see when people are just approach it as a job and they're just there, point, shoot, take pictures, whereas
Mhm.
the ones who take the time to immerse themselves a little bit more in what's happening and really taking part um as not as a guest, but it's like this hybrid guest vendor situation because
Yeah,
you want them to be embedded with the guests in a
right.
specific way so that they can capture. So that's a really, really good point. Any other questions that you wish people would ask you and you're just like, you guys are missing the big picture or a big part of it.
Yeah, I think people, and if they don't ask, I usually just tell them, but,
Mm,
if they're, interviewing or trying to find a photographer, they should find out sort of like, is the person, um, like, what do they expect in terms of, do you need meetings leading up to the event? What's the payment structure? Are you expected to do a 50% deposit, or, you know, a fixed rate
mm,
for the deposit? Um, I also think you should know whether or not they have like backup equipment on the day of. Say something happens to their camera and they drop it, or something stolen, which has happened. Not to me, but I've heard it happen to people where their camera bag is stolen. Do they have backups? What happens if you need to cancel the wedding? Which happened a lot during the pandemic. A lot of people had to cancel, and they didn't realize that their vendors or their venues don't allow refunds, or they're not flexible with like rescheduling the event. And so it's sort of like a rude awakening to have that, like, to realize that you signed a contract that doesn't allow flexibility.
mm,
um so you really want to ask about that too. And I do think it's also good to know if the person is going to deliver, the desired images in a certain time frame that you're looking for. Um, some people take really long to edit, but you should know that up front and not be shocked at the end,
mm.
realizing it's a year later and you don't have your photos yet, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
You just want to get a sense of like, what can we expect, not just on the day of, but leading up to the day and afterwards as well.
Those are all excellent questions. Do you
Mhm.
provide your clients with like a checklist of like these things that, you need to know and I need to know, and just so we're really clear about all of these points?
Absolutely. So leading up to a wedding or even any type of event, I have a way, so it's basically just a form that they can fill out, and then we have a meeting as well. And the form is just to allow them to communicate the smaller details about who should be in the photos, what time things are happening, um, if they have specific places they want their photos to be taken, and getting permits if they're needed. So it's a lot of pre-planning before, so
Mm,
that on the day of, we're not scrambling trying to figure out, is uncle whoever around for this photo. Like, we already are ready in
mhm.
advance, and things can still happen even with that type of preparation, but at least you got most of the important things down on paper, so we're all aware of what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, so pivoting a little bit, to pet peeves. This is one of my favorites because I feel like, people hire you and then forget you're a human being first and foremost.
Mhm.
And they have their preconceived notions as to what it entails. Why do you cost so much? Why does the edits take so long? Why can't
Mhm.
I just get raw files? So if you had to, and you might have several, but if you had to give me your top three pet peeves,
Yeah,
not
I
about
could.
any particular client. And listen, if your past clients are listening, this is not about any particular client. This is just generally speaking to the industry as an event. I'm giving the waivers and disclaimers
I
just so that
appreciate
they
it.
don't come at you and be like, "Why podcast?"
I
It's definitely not
appreciate
about
it.
that.
No, I do have some pet peeves, and I'm a pretty easygoing person, but of course some things are annoying. So, um, I think there's an idea that photographers just press a button, like, you show up, you press the button, we can all do it. Like, it's not that hard.
Mm,
But as we've just talked about, there's a lot of pre-planning that goes into it. There should be. I don't know if every photographer does that, but it's essential to having a smooth, event. The pre-planning, the communication, um, sometimes a walkthrough of the venue. These things kind of help with the day of. And then, of course, on the day of, you're not just pressing a button. I mean, you have to press the button. That is part of it. But there's so much more. So you are trying to manage not just capturing the moment, but also sometimes evoking emotion. Like, sometimes I feel as a photographer, I'm giving so much to get the images, if that makes sense. Like, I'm trying to be friendly. I can't be just like down. I can't be sad. I can't be like, who wants a sad photographer around, Like,
like,
okay,
"Hey,
guys, look
there's
over
so
here. Like,
band
it's not
here.
fun.
You
It's
can't be
not
more."
right. Right. Like, I have to be like, hey, how's it going? You look great. Da da da. Like, that takes a lot of energy, and I'm not an introvert, but I get tired. I'm like, whew, like, here we go. Let's bring that vibe to get people into the moment. And then, of course, the lighting, the composition. And then after it's all said and done, you are like, okay, now I have to deliver. Not only deliver on the day of, but deliver after the event, because everyone's like, I need to post on Instagram. I need the photos. I didn't even get home yet. And people are like, where are the photos?
Like, "Hey, just sitting down for the first time in like 11 hours,
Right? Like,
scarfing
give me some
my face full of
time.
French fries."
Literally, literally. And so another pet peeve is like, okay, give us a little bit of time, just to get ourselves together and deliver the images afterwards. And thankfully, I can be honest and say that I have really good clients. Like I'm not even exaggerating. They're very reasonable people, very practical, very, not caught up in the show necessarily. Like they value what I do. So, but I do think there are those that are a bit just a little bit too demanding. And I think that's why it's important to communicate your turnaround time beforehand, communicate all your needs and all of what you expect or what they can expect as well, so that there's no misunderstanding afterwards. And you may have to say it more than once. It's not enough for it to just be in the contract. You may have to remind them, okay, guys, it was a great wedding. You will hear from me. You'll get your gallery in this much time. And then they have that expectation.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good point. I always wonder too about, especially in this new era of um of photography, where obviously like phones, iPads, if you're the aunties and uncles,
Yeah.
everyone can actually capture a moment and take a picture um and such. So yeah, I'm
Mhm.
always curious about that, which we'll talk about in our next segment, so to speak,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
future of event photography. Um, but thank you for sharing your pet peeves with us, because I'm not a wedding photographer and I get annoyed by those.
I have one more actually. I just thought
Ooh,
of one.
yes.
Um, People think Photoshop is a magic tool. Oh, it can be photoshopped. My dry skin can be photoshopped. My I'm not even gonna go down the list, but no, it can't. I mean, it can, but photographers are not necessarily Photoshop experts.
Mm,
Like Photoshop, in the world of like fashion photography, a lot of the photographers take the photo and then the photoshopping and retouching is done by a completely separate person or a separate, company, to get the magazine covers. Like it's not always your photographer's expertise to Photoshop things that are just like,
right.
completely impossible to fix. So I try to encourage people to just be ready, wear clothes that fit properly, you know, um, put some lotion on, like I just want you to look as good as you can in person so that the job for, the post editing process is not as difficult. And of course, some things you may not notice on the day of because it's just like a high paced day. Um, but it's so much easier if you just try your best to like hire the right makeup artist, hire the right hairstylist, make sure everything is sort of as close to perfection as it can be. So that way, when you're looking at your photos afterwards, you can be like, okay, yeah, that was close to exactly how it was. Of course, our job is to enhance it a little bit, make sure it looks even better. But we can't Photoshop every single thing, So you got to give your photographer some grace and understand that extensive photoshopping may be something that needs to be outsourced, or it may be something that your photographer can do, but it slows down their editing process because they have to take the time to, fix how many images that may need that extra fixing. So, yeah, it can be photoshopped is a very common thing to say, but it's not that easy.
That is a really good one that I, of course, until you brought it up, I'm like, of course,
Yeah.
that people have this expectation. And it's just like those, yeah, like you said, and really good example of magazine photography and editing. Like those are two very separate skill sets. Like the editors don't take pictures, and you don't want your photographer to have to, not everyone is Walmart, right? There's a reason why the beer store exists. For the
Yeah.
non-Ontario listeners, we have literally a store called the beer store. Very, very clear what you're going to walk in and walk out with, right? Yes, you can
Yeah.
get beer at the liquor store, but you are very clear, right? Whereas like Walmart is going to sell you everything from wine to diapers. And, what is the quality of a Walmart when it does sell you everything versus a boutique store that just sells bras versus,
Mhm.
again, versus Walmart. Walmart's going to sell whatever to the masses. A boutique store is going to have a wide range of that one product.
Mhm.
But they have a clear specialty and expertise. And yeah, I think it's a really good point in terms of not having this expectation that your photographer who's been honing their skills in photography and maybe still augmenting their skills and flexing their skills and trying to practice, etc., on taking the picture and editing the
Mhm.
picture, not
Mhm.
learning this new tech tool. I don't want to say new, but newish.
Mhm.
Um, because those are two very, very, very different things. And like you said, if you want every tendril that's on my hair out of place right now, plus, okay, I've got a pimple and I want the background changed, like all that to do that to just that one picture probably would take, a long period of time. And you
Very
want
long.
that times hundreds of pictures, 11 hours with the photography. So that was an excellent point. And what you can do in the future is really just send people to this podcast, be like, listen to this before you hire me. So very much.
Exactly.
So it's a good segue. We were talking a little bit about tools. So I'm really curious about what the future of event photography is with the advent of AI. And of course, back in the day when camera phones came into existence, I was like, oh, Uncle so and so can take the pictures on the phone. We used to have, disposable cameras on the tables. But I'm really curious from your perspective what the future of event photography is with all these tools and expectations that people do have.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays it's even easier for people to get started in photography. And I think it's really cool. I think AI and camera phones make our jobs a little bit easier, to be honest. It democratizes the landscape for people to enter the industry. And I like that. I mean, I love photography and I love the idea that people who may not have a budget can still have nice photos taken, you know? Um, I do think though that even though it kind of like lowers the bar a little bit for entry into photography, I don't think these, you know, um conveniences are going to replace the need for professional event photographers. Um, and I really just think that's because it's more about like a human creativity that is required, like a photographer's creativity and what people call the eye, like, oh, she has an eye for, capturing moments. And I don't think you can replace that with, these things. I noticed that a lot of people get caught up in photography equipment. So they want to know, what type of camera do you use? Like they'll ask me that a lot. Like, what type of camera do you have? Or what type of flash or lighting do you use? But ultimately, those things matter, of course, but I don't think that defines a photographer. So, you can have any camera and still have beautiful images. What I do like about AI and, the abilities that or I should say the technology in general, is that it sort of enhances the experience. So, for example, I have some images where I played around with AI. I was like, okay, let's see, like, what can it do?
Right.
And I was really impressed because it enhanced the image, not to the point of like putting an Eiffel Tower in the background. I'm not talking about that because I've seen people do that, but I've seen like just little things, for example, that can just sort of like enhance the moment. I okay, so let me give you an example, not too technical. Capturing a wedding, an outdoor wedding, for example, sometimes what happens is the sky, to our eyes, we're seeing beautiful detail in the sky, the clouds, or like a beautiful sunset, something like that. But in order for us to capture the color of the sky, we may lose the ability to see, the people. It might be too dark in the picture. So if you were to use AI, you could still bring out the detail in the sky and still be able to see the people really well. So it's like just little enhancements that sort of make it so that the photos are more real to what you saw on the day of. And AI can be used within Photoshop to bring some of those things, or make some of those things possible. So there's ways that it really enhances what we're doing. And I'm all for that. Like, I think that's great. It just makes our job easier. It makes our job better. And it sort of elevates what the final product can look like. But I don't think it's gonna, replace the need for professionals. I really don't. I think if anything, it makes the professionals a little bit better and more savvy and able to do, more things with the final product. So I like it. I think it's a great thing.
That's really interesting point. I've been so like anti AI.
Really? No.
I think for me, I'm just like, I think, well, I'm just also very much of any new tech tool, who is it benefiting? Who is it making rich? And by the time it gets to the point of being democratized, it's been taking advantage of disenfranchised and marginalized people, right? Like the people who are getting rich off of it right now don't look like you and I. And by the time you and I can get rich, it's like crypto and NFTs, right? Like by the time it gets down to the masses, then it's no longer the thing to do, but people have been able to become, millionaires off of it. So I'm always just like, how is this going to harm Black and brown people? I'm a person who, I'm not super techie, but I've had to build websites. I, run Black Moms Connection, and I know when I go on, photography websites where I'm looking for stock images, like seeing Black people was sometimes non-existent, or the types of images, even going to Google image search, when you put in Black mom, porn comes up. Like it was just always, so for me, I'm always just like, I'm always just thinking about how is this going to harm Black and brown people. And that's why I have like this, especially this giant push, like putting it everywhere, like your search bar in Instagram and like in freaking WhatsApp. Like, does it need to be everywhere? Like, who is benefiting from this being put everywhere is more my rant against AI. But I do love what you just mentioned in terms of, democratizing the ability to, entry into the field, and also capturing things the way that people saw it on that particular day. I think that that's a really beautiful and important point. To the Sepia Bride.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, the internets. So I mean, I was paying attention, and then I wasn't, and then I was paying attention to it. And so for those that don't know, and if you didn't listen to the mailbag episode of the podcast, then you should. Basically, a lady got married. She hired a photographer. The photographer gave back the pictures. They were not to the bride's liking. And then the internet turned into two factions: team bride and team photographer. Um, I feel like I remained Switzerland. I saw both sides of the argument and I tried to be, I'm just like, here's the things that maybe you should have asked for, or maybe you should have looked for. But I also said, I'm gonna ask a professional. So this is me asking a professional their professional opinion on
Yeah.
even how that all went down. Knowing now what I know is just like, did they
Mhm.
have the right conversations beforehand? Did they have, you know, all that pre-prepped? Would
Yeah.
that have negated Sepia Bridegate?
Yeah. Well, I think so. For those who are like probably like, what are they talking about? This sepia, I don't know, back in the day, people remember sepia as like that orangey kind of look to photos. So the bride was so upset because she felt like her photos were just like edited in a way that made her look terrible. Like I think she felt like her teeth looked yellow or orange, and in some images her like she just didn't like the post processing. I think she liked the moments that the photographer captured, but she didn't like the editing style. And I think for me, knowing that my editing style is very like it's a style. Like I don't change my editing style very much, It's kind of like it is what it is type of thing. I am very I've had people ask me to change things, but I try to be true to who I am as a creative and deliver a standard. If you look at my work, there's sort of like a standard of how the images look, and I think that photographer has a right to maintain her style of photography, or her style of editing, I should
Mm,
say. Now, there's a limit to that, though. There's a limit. I feel for that photographer, because I don't think her intention was to make this bride look bad, or make her feel so entitled to the raw images, which I think the bride ended up editing her own images afterwards. Um, I do feel like as a photographer, it's also your job to, I don't know, sort of like communicate in advance, not just like vocally, but in your contract, um, your style is that's your creative, freedom. And the bride has to understand what to expect. You know what I mean?
mm,
I just feel like in certain instances, I can see where the bride had a point. Like I was like, oh, that is a little bit too orange. Like
yeah.
the trees didn't look that dead. Like it looked like fall almost in some of the images. So like when you're applying your editing style, you still have to like tweak it a little bit so that it fits that particular event.
Yeah.
Um, I wish I just feel like TikTok is not TikTok, but like social media. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine? Like you're just doing your job and then someone decides to go online and just like trash you. Like
Mm,
I feel like there should have been communication beforehand and afterwards between the two of them to try and rectify the issue. I don't think it had to get to that level, but it's a
yeah.
good learning experience for brides and for photographers to have those discussions, in advance.
That's exactly my point. I think
Mhm.
I said the exact same thing. I was just like, I feel like, and she probably posted. I mean, you never know what's going to go viral. The internet is weird that way. You can
Mhm.
have a random throwaway post, and then like you wake up and from a nap, and then you've gone viral, and you're like,
Right.
how and what?
Like,
Uh,
why? I have literally a video like that. Like, I posted it for fun, and it's the most popular. I just can't believe it. I'm like, that?
you can't predict it, you can't plan it. Um, and so for her, she probably was just venting on her TikTok. How many followers did she have before that point? Like, I don't think she's a household name. I don't think she's even influencer as such. And it picks up, and people love to rally. People love to rally what they think is for the the, the good guy in a situation, and turn people into a villain. I'm just like, did you have an email or a phone call conversation with this lady before you took to the internet?
Right.
And that's what will always be the thing for me. I'm just like, did you guys try to sort this out beforehand?
Right.
You did. And she was just like, your pictures are your pictures, and you paid for them, and I don't want to talk to you anymore. Then
Yeah.
you
Then I can
elevated
see
my
it.
petty, and
Right.
now I don't care about you as a human being anymore.
Right.
So I think, like, yeah, the root of everything is communication.
Absolutely.
And you got to over communicate. It's not enough to just, go on an Instagram and go on a website. On Instagram, like you said, that picture is edited. It's edited, and then it's edited again. Um, so it's just like, I would love to. Can people ask for raw files? Like, can they ask to see what the raw picture looks like before it's edited, and then like a sample, so in that way they can like compare and contrast, be like, oh, okay, I totally understand. Not necessarily of their wedding, but like of a previous client's wedding.
That's actually, I've never had that before, raw files are sort of like this thing that like, it's like, for example, if, your cake person said like, do you want to see the flour or like the dough before I make your cake? Like, it's kind of like, no, no, because it's like would the bride show up without makeup on? No. Like it's just not a thing. The raw files are like these unbaked raw cookies or cake. Like, ew, who wants that? Who like no, who wants that? So I always feel like my work really comes alive in the editing process. It's like,
Right.
okay, now I can put my special final touch on it to
Hmm.
make it pop, So I don't think I would share the raw files. I do think that it's okay for someone to come back and say, um, nicely, like, hey, can you maybe make this adjustment for me? I'm noticing like so blah blah blah. She felt like her eyes were dark underneath in some of the images. Maybe there's a way for the photographer to go back and say, okay, yeah, I can make that adjustment, or I can't unless, you pay me or whatever, like whatever the contract says. But I have heard from clients of other photographers where the client said, I asked my photographer to make this edit and they said no, they're not going to make that change. And
Mm.
that is if the contract says that the photographer has like, the creative freedom and the style of the photographer's choice, that is the photographer's right to turn down certain edits, which is like, it's kind of crazy, right? Because you're like, but I'm in the photo, so don't I get to say? And it's like, not really. The photographer is like the author. Like when you think about a book, you're not going to go to the author and tell the author how to rewrite the book. The book is the book.
Right.
If you don't like the ending, it is what it is, you know? So it's just like, but I'll say also that if you want to work again as a
Mhm.
photographer and you want to have those word of mouth referrals and you want to have like just a good rapport with your past clients, it would be in your best interest to work with them a little bit. I have had people say, is there a way that you can brighten these, or I don't know, just little tweaks? Of course. Yes, of course I can. That's not a big deal. the way I see an image may not be the same way the bride sees the image. She's looking at herself and her beauty. I'm looking at the composition, the lighting, the beauty, and everything. So why not try to make it work with the person a
Right.
little bit within reason?
Within reason.
So that's why it's so important to meet with the person, see like what's can we actually have a working relationship? Is the contract fair? Like your contract can be more photographer leaning, or it can be more client friendly, like, or maybe it's like a good balance. And I feel like your contract should be a good balance between, okay, the photographer has control, however, blah, 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 blah. Like you can
Right.
put that in there and make it a fair contract where there's some flexibility because it's their photos. They're going to hang it on their wall. They're going to put on their Instagram. They're going to make an album. They're going to, like, wouldn't you want them to like it and
Yeah.
like the experience?
Yeah.
So it's hard. I don't think there's an easy way, but communication helps. It really does.
Absolutely. Well, this was amazing, as I knew it would be, because I am a fan of learning. And no matter how long, you've been in the industry, um, it is always evolving and changing. And there's things, of course, the amount of times that I've chatted with photographers, they're working just like I am. So those chats are very it's more so, are we on time? When should I serve dinner? Do you need more time for these post-ceremony, pre-dinner pictures? That's usually the extent of my conversations with wedding photographers in the moment. So, and it's just like, have you eaten? Do you want chicken or fish?
Mhm.
Uh, so this is the most in-depth I've gotten a chance to really learn about the nuances, some things that I of course know because I've seen and observed, and things that I definitely wouldn't because it's not my field and industry. So thank you so much for taking the time to share. Where can people find and follow you if they're looking for an event or wedding photographer?
Yes, I am on Instagram at Samantha Clarke, and Clark has an E at the end. My website is www.samantha-clarke.com. And I am on TikTok. And it's Sam Clarke Photo on TikTok. So those are the places that people can find me.
Awesome, awesome. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much for listening, everyone. Hope you learned something. Hope you now have a little bit more newfound respect for event photographers. And if you are planning an event or a wedding, you've now got more questions that you should be asking and things that you know. And that's about that. So until next time, we will keep the red carpet ready for you.